You might have heard Sony have just announced a new camera, the A7C. Now, I haven't used the camera, tested the camera, not even held the camera. But I'm going to talk about it anyway, which is going to set some people off along the lines of, why are you wasting time talking about a camera that you've not even tried yet? So just to appease you guys, have a dog instead. Now, I've been rattling my brain trying to come up with a single word to describe and summarize the A7C, and I can't think of one. The closest I can come up with is a single noise, and that is, huh? Because in essence, it seems what Sony have done to make this camera is they've taken most of the internals of an A7 III. They're using the same sensor, the same processor, the same battery, the same screen. But they've used the screen hinge off the A7S III. And they've taken the viewfinder out of an aubergine, and they've blended them all together and molded it into something that resembles an A6400. But if I was to summarize this camera in 2 words, it would be logically illogical. Or illogically logical, whichever way you prefer to have it. When it was all rumors and speculation and we were all thought it was going to be called the A5, what was being talked about made quite a lot of sense. What's being released doesn't quite live up to the expectations. My first gripe with this camera, however, is the naming. So they've essentially miniaturized the A7 III and called it the A7C. Like, are they intentionally trying to confuse people? I'll guarantee at some point in this video I am going to say 3 rather than C, or C rather than 3. I mean, what the hell next? Are they going to release a miniaturized version of the A7S III and call it the A7 Estuary? Or are they going to release a miniaturized version of the A7R4 and call it the A7R5? But why do I think the A7C is logically illogical? Well, there's no question in my mind that the A7 III is a fantastic camera. It was the biggest selling full-frame mirrorless camera when it was released, and is still to this day one of the most popular full-frame mirrorless bodies on the market. But for me, what was so great about it was that for the price point, it offered so much in the way of features that appeal to both stills and video. And even 2 years later, when you compare it up in terms of its stills capabilities compared to newer cameras that are coming on the market, it still holds up pretty well. But in terms of video, it's starting to show its age a little bit now. So when the A7C was first being rumored, it sounded like it was going to be the A7 III internals put into a smaller body and then given a little bit of a boost, especially in terms of video. So there was talk of, 4K 60 or 10-bit recording or 422 recording, because we've just had the release of the A7S III, which just trounced everything in terms of video specs. So I think we maybe kind of expected to see more of the same. We've not got that. But kind of really frustratingly is that we've not even got the A7 III shrunk down in a smaller body, because while we have made some changes that improve over the A7 III, so we now have a front-facing screen, great. We now have no 30-minute record limit, great. And they have eye autofocus in film as well. I think they've kind of taken some of the autofocus features from the A7S III. So they've improved some aspects of the video features, except they've then gone and nerfed a load of other features and aspects of the A7 III, which kind of makes no sense whatsoever. So it's a compact, full-frame interchangeable lens camera that Sony are touting as being perfect for vloggers. Except less than 6 months ago, they released the ZV-1, which was a smaller, lighter, compact camera with a small sensor that Sony were touting as being perfect for vloggers. Which is it? Yes, the camera body has been shrunk down a little bit, but not a huge amount. The biggest reduction in size has been moving the viewfinder off the top and pointing it down the side. But I'm pretty sure it's also a much smaller viewfinder than the A7 III as well. Now the EVF is probably less of an important feature for video shooters, and it's really more of a key feature for still shooters. So putting a worse EVF in straight away is a step back on the photography aspect of things. Now the first major differences between the C and the 3 that I noticed was in the leaked photos on Sony Alpha Rumors, and that is that the front dial is missing. So on the A7 III, you've got the rotatable thumb wheel, you've got a dial on the top up here at the back, and then you've got another one on the front. And I love this setup. It was one aspect that I raved about in my original review of this camera, which is that I can have the ISO and the aperture and the shutter on 3 different dials, all independent to each other, all dead easy to turn. And it's one thing about the likes of the A6400 that I hate. On the A6400, I've got to have like the shutter speed on one dial at the top, but then there's no second dial, so I've got to have the aperture and the ISO on the thumb wheel. But there are times where I go to change one and I end up changing the other. So having 3 dials for me has always been a big plus point of this camera over the likes of the A6000 series. And the A7C has done away with the front dial. Now again, there's probably not much of a concern for video shooters, but when I'm shooting stills, you're constantly changing all of your settings depending on the look that you're going for. So again, by removing that dial, it seems to be a negative towards the photography side of the camera rather than the video side of the camera. Now also removed, but this is a kind of general negative, there's nowhere near as many custom buttons on the A7C as there is on the 3, and there's no thumb joystick either. So like when you want to move your autofocus point around, you have to do on the wheel rather than the own independent thumbstick, and I much prefer the thumbstick. Now, the lack of 2 memory card slots. So again, A7 III, a big feature of this camera for me was the fact that it had 2 SD card slots so you could shoot redundant. The A7C doesn't have that. That wasn't really a surprise because none of the A6000 cameras have 2 card slots either, and the moment they started talking about the A5 being like a full frame A6000, I think it was pretty much assumed by everyone that it was going to be a single card slot. What was a nice surprise, however, is the fact that I was expecting this single card slot to be underneath in the battery compartment, the same as the A6000s, but it's not. They've actually moved it around to the side. So they've made some improvements to the camera. Most noticeable, I think, between the C and the 3 is the inclusion of an articulating screen. A little disappointing, however, that they still used the A7 III screen, not used a higher resolution screen, even if they'd used the screen on the A7R III. Pretty sure that's a higher resolution than this. Maybe they're saving that for the A7 IV. It's a little disappointing, however, to see that it still carries the same next to non-existent touch functionality that the A7 III has, in which that it clearly is a touch panel because you can touch to focus, but you can't touch the menu systems, which renders basically for me the whole thing pointless and why I just have touch operations turned off on my cameras. And the menu layout as well. Now, the A7 III menu isn't the worst, but it has been significantly improved in the A7S III. And once I'd seen it in the S3, I kind of figured they were going to put the same menu system in the A7, or pretty much every subsequent camera, but they haven't. Now, I believe Sony's excuse is to do with the processor. They're saying that the processor that's in the A7C is the same as the A7 III, and it's not able to perform touch functionality on the menus, and the menu system can't be updated to the A7S III. It would need the A7S III's processor to do that. Sorry, I call bullshit on that. So I don't buy that the processor is capable of only managing to do touch functionality for autofocus, but it can't then go, oh, you've touched over there and run a menu, let's go to that. And the freaking menu system's a graphics user interface. I'm not saying they should have all the options that are in the A7S III because not all the features are there, but you're telling me you couldn't design it to look like the A7S III? I don't think so. I was expecting to see some improvements in the actual video features themselves. Now, as I said, we've got an improved autofocus, so it's now got like eye autofocus, but it still shoots the same frame rates, the same resolutions, and it still shoots the same bit rate and color space, 8-bit 420, which was just about acceptable 2 years ago, but I really was expecting to see at least one of them upgraded in the A7C, whether it be 10-bit video, whether it be 422, whether it be 4K, even if it was 4K 60 at 8-bit 420, just something to distinguish it from the A7 III. You're breathing down the microphone, dog. And with carrying the exact same sensor in the A7C as in the 3, you get exactly the same features, functions in terms of stills performance and video performance. It's the same image quality, the same noise performance, the same dynamic range, the same shooting speed, and same sensor, same readout speeds, same amount of rolling shutter. And in terms of pricing, the C is around the same price as the A7 III. And this is why the camera generally kind of makes no sense. Because, as I've already covered, the 3 is a brilliant all-round camera, but it is better for stills. And then they've brought out the A7C, which is a more video-shifted version of the 3, but the video features don't see much of an improvement to bring it more in line with what the competition's doing, but takes a lot away from the stills perspective. So if you're someone who's mostly a still shooter, or like me, a hybrid between shooting stills and video, I'd be leaning more towards the 3 than the C. And if you're someone who's more into shooting video, I'd look to something different altogether. Like if you're really interested in shooting video, then you'd go all out for the A7S III. I mean, yes, I know they're marketing the C towards vloggers, but do you really need a full-frame camera for shooting vlogs? Like I said, less than 6 months ago, we were being told that the ZV-1 compact camera was ideal for shooting vloggers. Well, no, for vloggers shooting video. We don't want to shoot the vloggers. I know there's people out there that would like to shoot vloggers, but you would use an AK-47 rather than a ZV-1. I mean, seriously, for me, I find aps-c cameras more than sufficient for shooting vlogs. You've got access to lenses like the A6400, Sigma 16mm f1.4, barnstorming combination for shooting vlogs, and has one big added benefit for vlog shooters that the A7C doesn't have, which is something I've covered several times before, which is that the screen sits above the lens, not out to the side. For shooting vlogs, a side flip screen is a crap idea because you keep having to look off axis of the camera to see what you're doing. So a flip up screen would have been so much better for the A7C. So I'm no doubt the A7C is going to suit some people's needs, and there will be people buying the A7C. But I think there's so much more potential within that camera that it could have been. However, there is one silver lining to this whole saga, which is that with the A7C being so close both in name and specs to the A7 III, that the A7 IV, whenever that comes about, is less likely to just be small incremental upgrades over the A7 III, because that's still going to leave it too close to the C. So hopefully with the C basically being the 3 anyway, the 4 is going to be something far more adventurous. Fingers crossed. But what do you guys make of the A7C? Let me know your thoughts in the comment box down below. While you're down there, if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and also consider checking out my Patreon accounts as well, where from just $5 a month, you can get some exclusive behind-the-scenes content and access to some prize competitions as well. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.